Folks, Trump
And so
ordered
what
for
I appreciate
sentencing
is
in
this
hush
moment
money
in the
case. Stormy
distinguishing
Daniels
of
strikes
the power
again.
granted by the Supreme Court with the immunity
That's what this
that,
is
that
about.
he would have as president,
The
not
Stormy Daniels
applying
hush money
to
case.
an incoming president, someone
This
who
is on
hasn't been sworn in
MSNBC,
yet. And I
folks. You
think
didn't
that's a
see this
wake-up
on
call for him on the
CNN.
boundaries that he's facing,
They're
but
trying to make
also
nice
with
of the
Judge Merchan and
Republicans.
what regular people working their regular jobs are willing to do in terms of accountability.
Mr. Rubin, I will tell you, I did in fact highlight the same section from you on page
Judge
7. What
Merchan
I had
orders
missed,
Trump for
though, that you
sentencing
brought
on
to my
January
attention
10th.
was this footnote, footnote number 2. I'm going to read it for our audience and for you, and then you can put it in context for us.
Wow.
You have the judge sort of commending both legal teams, saying there was a lot of rigor here, this was great legal representation. And he says, though, there have, however, been instances when in written submissions, counsel has come dangerously close to crossing the line of zealous representation. And the professional advocacy one would expect from members of the bar and officers of the court, and this court has at times made counsel aware of its observations and concerns. Now, however, counsel has resorted to language, indeed rhetoric, that has no place in legal pleadings.
Yeah, Alicia,
So what does that
this
mean?
is a long time coming from Judge Merchan, and as he knows, he had warned the parties previously, but increasingly, as this case went on, we saw pleadings from the Trump team that looked more like press releases or looked like electoral documents as opposed to something that you would file in a court of law. I remember talking with our colleague Von Hilliard many times about how the cycle between politics and law had just collapsed completely, that each of their filings seemed to be as much a political statement as it was a legal filing, if not more so. And here Merchan is saying enough is enough, because the way in which you talked about the district attorney's office here, the way you accuse them of weaponizing the justice system again and again, and sort of treating your legal filings almost as if they were Donald Trump bingo cards with all the hallmark words that he uses about his experience with the justice system is unacceptable. Not only is it unacceptable, it leads to dangerous situations for all sorts of participants here. I want to remind you and our viewers that the gag order in this case, while it was narrowed after the trial, was never fully lifted. And that's why Donald Trump cannot say things, for example, about the family member of the judge or any other court personnel. He can't talk about the family members of the district attorney. He could talk about the participants in the case itself. But he was still under some gag orders, in part because his rhetoric had just become so overwhelmingly dangerous, not just to the people who participated in this trial, but to people who were ancillary to it, the people who populated the courtroom, the people who were related to the people who litigated this trial, in ways that, as documented by Alvin Bragg's office, resulted in a plethora of threats to them and a significant uptick against that which they had seen in prior years. And here Merchan is saying, what you are doing here is reminiscent of what the Chief Justice talked about in his year-end report. This is activity that threatens the independence of judges on which the rule of law depends and results in violence, intimidation, disinformation, and threats to defy lawfully entered judgments. And there, where we're talking about lawfully entered judgments, I also want to point out to you that folks may say, well, Donald Trump will never come to this sentencing. He'll just defy it. He'll ignore it. Merchan has already thought about that too, and he has indicated that Donald Trump doesn't have to show up in person in Manhattan on January 10th. In fact, he can show up virtually, and he's asked that Trump's counsel let the court know by January 5th, theoretically, so that they can make adequate security provisions for any in-person appearance, whether he's going to come or not. It will be telling to me whether Trump tries to treat this as yet another opportunity to transform a courthouse into a press conference, as he did almost every day of that trial, or whether he stays away from Manhattan.
Lisa, do you have any reporting on the likelihood of an appeal, what an appeal would look like here?
Lisa, there kind of is an appeal already pending, and I'm glad you asked that question. Donald Trump's lawyers have maintained that they tried to remove this to federal court and that they were refused, erroneously in their view, by a federal district court judge in Manhattan, Judge Alvin Hellerstein. They have an appeal of that, and their position is, so long as there is a pending notice of removal, it is improper to take this case to sentencing. So I fully expect them to try and expedite those removal proceedings. There's supposed to be an oral argument on them later in this month, but I don't believe, before January 10th. And so as a result of that, look for them to make a very speedy application to the Second Circuit saying sentencing this guy, as this judge wants to do, is totally incompatible with the federal rules that govern removing a state case to a federal court. And our ability to preserve that option will be mooted by this guy if you guys don't act first.
I gotta tell you, Andrew,
And they're probably
when we
saying
come
so.
on here and I am handed a virtually 20-page document, my instinct is, of course, to plow through the details of it, the footnotes included, but I do want to make sure that I take a step back here and just ask you what this means
Take a deep breath.
for those who have an appetite for accountability, how to see this in the context of a conversation we have been having pretty much since Donald Trump took office and as we stand on the precipice of his second term in office.
This is history, folks.
This is a bold and I think really spirited sort of civic decision by Judge Merchan, where he is trying to really give full credit to the role of the future president and not interfere with the will of the people, but also understanding the need for the rule of law and that there is a jury verdict here on 34 felony counts that separates this case from any of the other 3 criminal cases. And then Judge Merchan points that out. And so he needs to give effect to that. And so what he is doing is preserving that conviction, actually 34 criminal conviction of the former president and now president-elect. And it's a very sort of Solomonic decision, but I really think it goes to his concern about the rule of law. And just to be in the weeds on footnote 2, which you were just talking to Lisa about, there he quotes Justice Ginsburg, and it's actually, he also quotes the current Chief Justice, and I'm just going to read it because I think it's just so beautifully written, where she said, "Judicial independence is worth preserving. An independent judiciary is essential to the rule of law.
It means that for the first time in history,
yet, and she
a
says,
president-elect
it is vulnerable to assault. It can be shattered if the society law exists to serve does not take care to assure its preservation. It can be shattered if the society law exists to serve does not take care to assure its preservation." And I think that is, in a nutshell, what Judge Merchan is doing here in saying that, that just because Donald Trump was elected does not mean he escapes criminal liability found by 12 jurors, men and women that are his peers, and he is going to give credit to that and not wipe it away as if it did not exist.
Hey folks, for more
So
of
you really
this,
do have a remarkable decision
subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube
matter,
and
but
bookmark
as you noted, he does say that there will not
Zenny62blog.com and
be a term of
ZennyReport.com,
incarceration, and because
Judge Merchan has ordered Donald Trump for sentencing on January 10th.
to be able to serve as president.
For a second, Judge Merchan has ordered President-elect Donald Trump for sentencing January 10th. The question is, will he show up in person or will he show up by video? Either way, he's got to show up. Subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube and bookmark ZennyReport.com. Wow, what a first.